everyone. The piece we just performed was by Eric Wolfgang Korngold. It's a piece called Marietta's Lied from the opera Die Tote Stadt. I would like to thank Peter also for playing with me today. It is an enormous honor for me to be asked here today to speak. I am very used to being on the stage. I'm very used to being on this stage. I've performed here many times in the capacity of being a classical violinist. Never have I been asked to turn up on stage just to speak, and the first thing I did was play, obviously. I chose to play really for a few reasons. The first being my deep belief and respect for the kind of communication that comes through one's sound. Subliminally, you are picking up all kinds of things about me as a person, about Peter as a person, and about the person that wrote this piece of music through my sound. There is such a direct, uncomplicated, and all-encompassing expression that comes through playing. The second reason I chose to play is simply because it's something I have done for more hours than I've done anything else in my life. Picking up the violin and putting it to my chin is like more normal to me than brushing my teeth, which I do every day, more than once. I started playing the violin when I was 4 years old. I come from an entirely non-musical family. Neither my mum or dad or their parents played any instruments whatsoever. In actual fact, they don't play instruments, they don't read music, they didn't even listen to any classical music. The musical taste of, well, I was going to say my parents, but I should really say my father, is in fact the Bee Gees and ABBA, and you could throw a little Shania Twain in there also. It definitely wasn't Tchaikovsky or Beethoven. Anybody who learned to play the violin will know that those first few years, well, specifically the first 6 months, can be really painful. Painful for the person learning, but even more painful for everybody around the person learning. It just sounds quite terrible. Nevertheless, I showed some talent for playing the violin, and I progressed quite quickly. And I distinctly remember I was about six years old, the first moment I really fell deeply in love with classical music. It's really quite an embarrassing story that I tried to tell my mum not to tell people, and yet I'm just about to tell you all. But I was practicing in a room on my own, playing a piece by Elgar, and I actually started crying as I was practicing the piece and ran through to my mum and told her, I just can't believe this music makes me feel like this and how beautiful it is. At just 6, it kind of seems really strange to be now, but that was the impact and the effect classical music had on me. Between the ages of 4 and 16, 16 being the age I really started my professional career, it was one long and slow journey of learning the discipline of practice. I started just 5 minutes a day, which grew into 10, which grew into half an hour. By the time I went to a music school at the age of 10, I was practicing up to 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours every day. During that entire time, I guess there was more than anything else, a deepening understanding for me of the act of playing an instrument, but a deepening love and understanding of the body of classical music, which encompasses so much music and encompasses some of the greatest minds and greatest souls that we know of today. At the age of 16, I entered into a competition, BBC Young Musician of the Year. This competition I was fortunate enough to win, and subsequently found myself with an entirely full diary of concerts, something like 120 concerts in the year, which for that age is really too many, and an arrangement with a management company and a recording contract with Universal. Because I sort of looked about right, played about right, and talked about right, and presented myself about right, I found myself aggressively offered many directions and many opportunities which were to make a lot of money very quickly, which were to increase my popularity, increase my fame, and increase my platform, all under the guise of making this music accessible. I would in the face of so much opportunity and, one could say, superficiality, would go back to my practice room and go back to my violin, and I would play Tchaikovsky, or I would play Bach, or I would play Korngold, and I would hear something, I would hear a message in the voices of those composers that was such a scarily stark contrast to the superficiality of the words that I was being fed and the opportunities that I was being fed. I heard something else in that music. And in actual fact, it was a time of deep unhappiness for me, and a time of deep questioning and deep contemplation. Out of that deep contemplation, I made some sort of a realization. The realization was in the direction of feeling responsible, feeling a deep responsibility to the education that I had been so privileged to receive, a deep responsibility not just to further educate myself, to dedicate myself fully to the core of classical music and to the core of my playing, but to commit myself from that moment onwards as fully as possible to passing on that education. I felt the weight of the education I had, and I felt the responsibility to pass that on. One of the manifestations of feeling that responsibility was to contact an organization in Scotland called Sistema Scotland. Sistema Scotland is inspired by a program begun in Venezuela 39 years ago under the name of El Sistema. El Sistema was founded by a man, Jose Antonio Abreu. He was an economist, a politician, and a musician, although that wasn't his job. He was growing into a state of deep distress, surrounded by unbelievable levels of crime, poverty, and social unrest in his country. And one day decided to give up his job and to begin a program that was to use music and the practice of classical music as the core inspiration for social change. El Sistema began with 11 violinists in an abandoned garage, and to this date has touched close to 500,000 young people in Venezuela. They learn to play in orchestra, they learn to sing in choir. All of their activity is around the activity of music. And the ethos of El Sistema is to provide music education free of charge. They target primarily environments and communities that are hugely underprivileged, and 70 to 90% of the children enrolling in El Sistema come from those backgrounds. I wasn't aware when I called Sistema Scotland that the very realization I had about recognizing the education I had received and the responsibility that should go hand in hand with that was in actual fact a core value of El Sistema. The children in El Sistema are taught hand in hand with their music education, not just to realize, but to vocalize their privilege and the responsibility of passing on what they have been taught. By the age of 12, 13, each and every one of those students becomes a teacher. They're in a constant state of teaching and of learning. They're in a constant state of receiving information and passing on information, of receiving and of giving. Each idea like that obviously requires a specific activity. Their specific activity is orchestral playing. The entire foundation of El Sistema is orchestral playing. For young people to learn to play in orchestra, you need to focus on so many skills at one time. Every child has to be in a constant state of sensitivity, of empathy, of awareness. You have to learn to play just about loud enough so your voice speaks, but not too loud so that you're covering the person next to you. You have to work out how to play fast enough that you're keeping up with everyone, but slow enough that you're not ahead of anyone. You have to be in a constant state of social awareness. That is so much the foundation of El Sistema, and a quality that you get through the act of orchestral playing, and all the children benefit from playing in orchestra. But Maestro Abreu, the founder of El Sistema, he heard something in the music itself. This is quite separate just to the act of playing an orchestra. He recognized a message of uplift, of solidarity, of human compassion in the core of the voice of composers, the likes of Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, and Bach. These composers, I believe, was what led me to my own realization of feeling the weight of my responsibility, the education I had received, and that wasn't for me to maintain a feeling of self-entitlement, that I deserve this and I should just keep it for myself and enjoy it. No, I came to the realization, I believe, through the voices and the profundity within classical music, the realization that that education had been given to me in order to pass on, in order to share. And I carry that responsibility with me now, and I have pledged to myself to pass on everything that I have learned to the best of my ability. So thank you all so much. Thank you.